Okay, Juliet, shall we get started?
I think it'd be rude not to. So, just two ticks. Right, well, hello and welcome to the Chartered Institute of Fundraising South East and London region's third virtual First Thursday. And it's really fantastic that so many of you joined us today. So thanks for coming along. So my name is Julia Ellis. And if we can have the next slide, please, Stephen. Oh, the one after that. Stephen, yeah, thank you. So I chair the committee, and all these lovely people here that you can see on your screen are the volunteers who are responsible for delivering our networking events. So we're all dedicated to promoting excellence in fundraising, and I'd like to thank the committee for all the hours of unpaid time they put in towards achieving this goal. We're currently recruiting for a head of mentoring, a head of marketing, and a treasurer. So please do get in touch with us if you're interested in joining our friendly and frankly fabulous team. I'd also like to thank Eden Brown, who sponsors our physical networking events and who you should definitely be speaking to if you're looking to find a job, change jobs, or even to recruit. Finally, if anyone today is not yet a member of the IOF, we've got a special offer for you. If you use the code LDN/group, that's LDN/group, you can get a whopping £44 off your first annual membership, which then just leaves you to pay £7.09 by monthly direct debit. So take advantage whilst you can. I'm now going to hand over to our Head of Events, Julie Roberts, who's going to talk you through how today's session is going to work.
Morning, everybody. Lovely to see you all here. We're still getting people piling through, so that's really great. So just a few house rules, not trying to be too boring, but if you have any questions throughout the whole session, please use the Q&A box below. You can see it's next to the chat function. So the Q&A function is slightly different. So if people write questions in there, you can actually rank some of those questions. So you may have a very similar question. So rather than writing the same one, you can actually vote and those questions will go up to the top. So please keep those coming the whole way through the session. We will keep you on mute whilst the panelists are talking, but when we go into the Q&A session, we will start going through some of those questions, so keep them running. Next slide, please, Stephen. Okay, so what we're going to cover today is each panel member is going to give you some of their key insights and thoughts around the topics that we're covering today, and then we're going to go straight over to Q&A open floor. So we're hoping to have at least 20-25 minutes to have those discussions. So like I said, keep the questions coming. We will answer them, as many as we possibly can, and I hope you enjoy today. So next slide, please, Stephen.
Thank you. Okay, so we have an amazing panel of speakers for you today. Sarah Jane O'Neill joined us a couple of months ago, and she's come back. So thank you, Sarah Jane. She's an interim consultant at Astorita Aldrich and Ward and is currently philanthropy director at the Scouts. She's got a string of amazing achievements to her name, including increasing major giving income by over 50% at Stonewall and cultivating 6- and 7-figure gifts for the Imperial War Museum. Now, when Sarah Jane was 20, she had a portrait painted by the Duchess of Marlborough at Blenheim Palace, although she hadn't realised she was meeting her until she got to the gates. A few years later, it turned up on the pages of the Mail on Sunday, no less, and had been bought by a Saudi Arabian prince. So what an incredible story. I'm sure I've got one like that, or maybe not. Anton Packheiser manages senior recruitment campaigns for Astorita, Aldrich and Ward, and is also an executive coach. He's long been involved in the sector on the recruitment side, but has also run the London Marathon for the Samaritans and volunteered at Her Majesty's Prison Wandsworth, supporting vulnerable individuals on their first night in prison, which sounds totally amazing. Julie Milnes has led many high-performance teams at blue-chip charities, including British Red Cross, Amnesty and UNICEF UK, and is extremely passionate about well-being. She was telling us that for the first time in 20 years, she started gardening again during lockdown. The last time she tried to garden was when she was living in Japan, where she ended up in hospital because of a very angry rash of some very angry, hairy, poisonous caterpillars. No hairy caterpillars so far, but sadly she has managed to kill all the plants she'd repotted in the past couple of months. I think I'd stick to the fundraising, Julie. Anyway, we're absolutely chuffed to bits that they agreed to be on our panel today, and it would be fantastic if you could please tweet about it using the hashtag IOF Thursday. And please tag us as well at IOF London. And now, without further ado, I'm delighted to hand over to Sarah Jane, Anton and Julie.
Good morning. So I think I'm kicking off first. So thank you so much, Juliet, for that introduction. And what I'll be talking to you today, as Juliet referenced, is about stress and resilience. I think particularly resilience is a really big buzzword, and it can be quite a nebulous concept. So I just want to spend a little bit of time understanding stress, understanding resilience, particularly in these, really interesting and difficult times that we're going through, but then hopefully giving you a few tips at the end of it for how you can start to build your resilience moving forwards. So I have got a presentation. Hopefully it's not going to be death by PowerPoint, but I think it just hopefully captures a little bit of what I'm saying and kind of combines a little bit of theory as well as my own insights, and hopefully that makes it nice and accessible for you. So to understand resilience, I think it's really important to understand stress. And I find this graph really useful to best understand how pressure at work impacts our performance. So it's really straightforward, but if we just sort of talk through it, is if you look at the left-hand side of that graph, is when there's not so much pressure, you get bored, your work isn't brilliant. I'm sure we've all had those cruisy days where, perhaps not doing as well as you could have done, and, you think something off that's about 70%. And I think it's recognizing that some pressure actually isn't great either. There's then the majority of where we spend our time. There's an average level of pressure, and it's our comfort zone. We know what we're doing and it's all really comfortable. But then as the pressure starts to increase, you get into your stretch zone. And actually, this is a really awesome place to be. I'm sure many of you will have, think of examples where there's just been that little bit more pressure that you've all of a sudden you're doing your best work, you're smashing it out of the park, you're, developing and growing. And that is a fantastic place to be. It really can be sometimes where we're doing our best fundraising. But it's a really kind of pivotal tipping point where actually just that pressure gets too much. And very quickly, it ends up being tired, you end up making poor decisions, poor judgment, that then kind of gets that slippery slope of burnout and health problems. And I think when it comes to resilience, it's really about understanding where you are and what that tipping point is. And one of the things that really, I think speaks to me on that graph is how quick that tipping point is. If you look at the left incline, it's quite nice and, kind of takes a long time to get to that breaking point. But actually, when that breaking point happens, it's really quick. And what I'd love for you to do, as one thing that you go away from this session is actually just working out where you are on that stress graph and what's happening with you right now, so you can really think about your resilience and how you can best build it. We move on to the next slide. If that's stress, then what is resilience? So I thought it was just, useful to share a couple of definitions. So the top one is around the capacity to recover from difficulties. And I always think of that almost like an elastic band, you're able to ping back into shape. And the second definition there is the wiki definition. And I think what I really like about that is it's stressed on coping with a crisis and returning to a pre-crisis state. What resilience is, it's about using those mental processes and behaviors, which means you can cope with that stress. So wherever on the graph, making sure you've got those mental processes and tools, behaviors in your toolbox, so you can really best respond and you aren't being knocked over by that domino of all the increasing pressures and stress that might happen. So my first tip on the next slide is really around mindset. And so when we're thinking about resilience, what can sometimes weaken our resilience is perhaps not being in the best frame of mind and a negative mindset. And what I really want you to start thinking about is, what are your thinking traps? What are some of the stories that you tell yourself that actually start to undermine your confidence and undermine your resilience? So some examples here on the slide about what some of those mindsets might be. And I think, one example, I'm working with someone at the moment, and their sort of thinking trap is, what happens if everything goes wrong? What happens if everyone suddenly gives me really bad feedback? What happens if, all of a sudden it's just all going to go belly up? And this person has no reason to think that. They are doing brilliantly. They're getting brilliant feedback. But it's slightly based on a previous experience that's built this sense of nervous and worry. I think we all have that devil in our shoulder that really kind of sometimes, I say, undermines our resilience. And it's about understanding that and how we can move forward so that we are in a better and resilient mindset. So on the next slide, I've got a little bit of, I guess, a brain exercise. You know, I think with the resilience, it's not going to happen overnight, and just, you know, recognizing that you're going to need to start challenging some of your mindsets to build those mental processes and behaviors. So I've tried to develop an easy-ish to remember mnemonic that hopefully will start to challenge the mindset and those thinking traps so you are in a better frame of mind. I think first of all, it's about understanding what's your adversity, what is that thing that you're up against. So it might be something like, I've been through a redundancy process and there were 3 people in my team, but now I'm the only one. What's your belief around that circumstance? What's your belief around that adversity? And it might be like, well, there were 3 people and I've got to do 3 people's jobs, I'm only one person. And then what is the consequence of that belief? It might be, oh my God, I can't do 3 people's work. There's so much. I don't know where to start. I'm feeling really overwhelmed. Those 3 people, my friends, they were way better than I am. I'm feeling really guilty, blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden it starts to snowball and it starts to feel really overwhelming. And that's when you start to feel more wobbly and more stressed, and actually it starts to really impact your resilience. And I think when that snowball starts to happen, it's about pausing and just stopping and going, but hang on, let me just challenge that belief. Let me just check that, is that true? So am I expected to do 3 people's jobs? And just really kind of taking that pause of whatever that belief is under that situation, is it really true? Or is it a thinking trap that's kind of tapping into an insecurity? And then I think the 4th step for me is one of the most powerful. I think often when we talk about resilience, it's, you can feel things are out of your control. And I'll talk about this more in a moment, but I think it's what can you do to take control, to feel more in charge. And so in this instance, it might be, well, hang on, let me talk to my line manager. And I think if I prioritize these things, is that right? You know, actually, you're not expecting me to do 3 people's jobs. It can really start to get you in that better mind frame and really start to move things forward for you to get to that pre-crisis state so you're best able to respond. So my second tip then is really around that, really around the doing and focusing on where you spend your energy and making choices. I'm sure many of you will have seen the sort of model on the right about, you know, what's in your circle of control and how you can influence things. So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's just a really simple set of concentric circles. So, you know, if you think about a situation in a workplace or outside of your workplace, there's things that are within your control, things within your gift that you can directly change. There's then your circle of influence, the things that you can start to nuance and lobby for and change and actually work together to influence to make that change. And then things that are in your circle of concern that absolutely impact you, but there's nothing you can kind of do about them. And a lot of time, I think people do spend on that circle of concern, which is in some ways the wrong place to spend your energy. And I think for me, when I think about resilience, like, well, what can I change? What is in my gift? What can I do to really address this circumstance? And I think rather than kind of getting up in the problem, getting caught up in the problem, kind of going in the spiral, it's thinking about a solution. As a fundraising leader, there is nothing I love more than one of my team coming to me and go, so you know that thing, or I'm sort of struggling with this, how about we try that? You know, that is music, you know, that means it's something that's on my head, and you've shown great initiative. And I think for me, in this brave new world in resilience, there's something where you get a real chance to be creative and really look at how you're doing your work. You know, in some ways we can't quite tear up the rule, but you've got the opportunity to take what worked in the old world and what's working in this new world of, you know, working from home and it's all being more digital and melding things together. I think it's an opportunity, you know, perhaps something didn't work before, but you can put back on the table. And I think there's something in this mindset and making choices. You know, the situation is different, but you have the power to potentially shape and change that path. And that's really, really an exciting place to be. And I think really helps build that resilience and kind of mindset. And I think finally on this making choices, it is about understanding who and how you need to influence and understanding potentially their frame of mind, their choices, how you can best help your managers and line managers, because they might potentially also going through some of their own struggles. So just really, you know, helping to work with them so you're joining up as a team. And my final tip is really, you know, to build your resilience, you actually, I think, need to do sort of a little bit of time really getting to understand how do you show your stress? You know, what is it that really means it shows that you're not coping, and becoming really familiar with those warning signals, but also understanding what it is to feel resilience. And this column on the right, again, is taken from like sort of studies saying people who are resilient show these behaviors. And again, I would love you to think back to that time where there has been that pressure, but you have smashed it, and what were the things that you were doing, and what were some of the behaviours and thought processes that helped you to really, really cope and get to that great place. And so I guess my final sort of tips and advice on the last slide that I have in terms of, just understanding, what makes you stress and how you show your stress and how you show your resilience means you can be kind to yourself and kind to your others. And I think, speaking up and sharing your warning signs, saying, this is what you'll see from me when I'm stressed, when my resilience is starting to go a little bit, this is it. I've recently worked somewhere where it was quite a small fundraising team, and there was actually a shared spreadsheet where people had in, here's when I'm stressed, here's the things to watch out for, and here's how I do it. And I just thought it was a really great way of openly talking about mental health, but also kind of creating that shared sense of well-being together, how we can support each other. I think, there's also about acknowledging it and talking about it. If your resilience is starting to go a little bit, there's, they say it's okay to not be okay, and make sure you're talking about it, because other people might be able to support those thinking paths or support you in your choices of where you're going. I think there's something for me about managing your energy, when your resilience potentially is feeling low, really making that choice of where you best spend your time. And some of you might be familiar with the concept of radiators and hoovers. So what gives you energy? Who gives you energy? What are the things that really create, just make you your best self? It might be exercise, it might be sport. I've got a very dear friend who loves basket weaving, and that's where she gets her calm and her peace. There are also things that are hoovers. What drains your energy? What takes it away? And you might not be able to get rid of those hoovers. One of your worst things might be, I just really hate doing database entry. You can't get rid of it. But how can you balance it with those things that do give you energy and the people that do give you energy? And I think lastly, for me, it's just really important to create space to switch off. Anybody who's worked with me, I'll chase you out of the office to make sure you leave on time, take your holidays. And I think when we're all working from home, it's really difficult to remember to switch off. And for those of you potentially have been furloughed or redundant, you might feel, I should be keeping busy, actually I should be keeping my job search. But actually a day off of your job search and actually looking at the things that give you energy to get you into a better frame of mind and build your resilience will be just as useful as spending a day applying for jobs. And so I guess the analogy I'll leave you with, and again, any who's worked with me will kind of know that I use this quite often, but it's a simple oxygen mask. You need to make sure that your oxygen's okay before you can help anybody else. And as fundraisers, we do such an important job, and we can't raise money for all the causes that we're doing and helping all those people that we need to if we're not our best selves. So I'm going to leave it there on resilience and well-being and hand over to Anton.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's an honour to be asked to present some information this morning, and hopefully I can add a little bit of value with regard to the subject that I'm covering. I'm Anton. I'm an associate with Astorita Aldrich and Ward, and just to give some context as to why I'm here, I've recruited for the sector for the last 13 years. I actually registered with Harris Hill in 2007 because I wanted to be a fundraiser, and a long story short, I was offered an account management position with the organisation. Over that period of time, I've been so privileged to work with some outstanding fundraisers across the board, from your fundraising assistant to your director of philanthropy and everything in between. And I've been able to support with placing at some amazing organisations. What I love about the charity sector, and in particular with fundraisers, I love the passion that fundraisers have. They have so much energy for the sector and the ability to represent an organisation and a campaign accordingly. What is, however, evident is that that enthusiasm, that ability to represent themselves effectively isn't necessarily replicated at the interview stage. So 3 years ago, when I joined Astorita Aldrich and Ward, I first discussed with my three directors, Tobin, Imogen and Mark, my interest in working with and supporting candidates on their journey. And they gave me the opportunity to set up a programme accordingly. Therefore, the last 3 years have been focused on coaching and training with regard to senior level appointments. But it is important to highlight that regardless of someone's seniority or level of experience, that right across the range, we all do need this support and help when it comes to interview practice and interview techniques. The point being, whether it is your CV, cover letter, application form, and indeed at interview stage, regardless of where you're at in your career, you must sell yourself. And so many fundraisers, and it's evident that many fundraisers do not really deliver on these incredible successes and achievements that they've had throughout their career. So some basic but really crucial things to cover. When it comes to your CV, really think about your achievements. Of course, the obvious income generation, figures that you've raised, percentages, but also thinking outside of the income generation box around team development, perhaps where you've contributed to brand awareness of an organisation. Get those successes down on paper. Cover letter does not need to be an essay. It's your opportunity to express your motivations for applying and to really emphasise your relevant responsibilities and achievements, of course, in relation to the role that you're applying for. When it comes to the interview, really, really important to package your answer. The most effective answer is a tangible one, one that tells a story. And I'm not talking about the STAR method or anything overly complicated. I'm talking about giving your answer a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning, painting the scene, describing what you were tasked with or what you were responsible for. The middle, talking about how you went about that, what you did, who you engaged with, and how you engaged with those stakeholders in order to be successful with regard to the project that you were responsible for. And then the all-important, the most important piece, really delivering on that outcome, what you achieved, what you learned from it, and therefore the contribution and what you were therefore able to do going forward in your capacity. Briefly, just wanted to touch on some of those really horrible questions that we've all had at some point within our career. Firstly, the weakness question. It's such a basic one, but it's a horrible one at the same time, and something that we, if we're prepared for, we can really effectively handle. So if you're asked that question, what do you consider your weakness to be? It isn't asked to find out what your weakness is to see if you are self-aware enough and self-confident enough within that interview, within that pressurized interview setting, to be able to say, yeah, this is my weakness, but this is how I've handled it, this is what I've done about it, and therefore it does not have a detrimental effect with regard to my ability to be successful. Salary question, another horrible one. If you're asked what salary you're looking for, we all feel that we have to justify why we're looking for a certain amount. We might even go off on tangents and talk about our commute is going to be longer. The really important thing to remember with the salary question is, firstly, you are in the room, you are in that interview setting for a reason, because you warrant the salary that's on offer. So therefore, my advice would be, when you're asked, and if it is, say, a salary bracket of 50 to 60k, and you're looking for 58k, you say, I'm looking for 58k, and then you smile and don't say another word. So important to come off with that confidence. And if there's an uncomfortable silence, you've answered the question. You didn't create that question, but yeah, the importance of just saying it confidently and following up with a smile. The mind blank issue, everyone's worst nightmare within the interview. What happens if you're asked a question and you don't know what to say, or the answer literally falls out of your head? Firstly, it's okay to show that you're a human being and to actually say to the panel, let me just think of the best example to give you. Let them see that you're taking a considered approach to your answer. This will only bode well when it comes to being reflective on how you operate with a peer, with your boss, and importantly with the donor as well. Let them see that you're a human being and that actually it's okay to take your time and importantly take that considered approach. When it comes to virtual interviews, really important to treat these as formally as you would a normal face-to-face in a board meeting setup. Think about your background, looking as professional as you would in that formal setting. As difficult as it is in an unfamiliar setting, be as conversational and engaging as you possibly can be. The great thing about this sector is that you will have someone to trust, to practice with. There will be a peer, an ex-colleague, a friend or a mentor. Rehearse and trust that person to be brutally honest with you. Ask them to be brutally honest with you. If you are asked to do a presentation, really important to rehearse that as well. And if it's a 5-minute presentation that you're given within the brief, make sure it's 5 minutes and not 8, 10 or 12 minutes. It is an unusual and uncomfortable setting. It's not something that we are familiar with, but if you can convey that enthusiasm and if you can be as conversational as possible, the more relaxed you will feel. Throughout this lockdown period, Astor Aldrich and Ward have placed several candidates from CEO, board of trustees, and the varying directors of fundraising within their own specialisms. The reason I highlight that is because I wanted to emphasise that this is all achievable with the right approach. So from the first interview right through to appointment, and within this very, very challenging lockdown period, that has happened, and we have had successes on that front. The reason I wanted to highlight that, as I've said, with that right and intelligent approach, with that practice and leaning on your peers or mentors, this is all very achievable. I think I've talked enough. If there are any questions throughout the session, perhaps we can get into the nitty-gritty a little bit more. So I do hope that was helpful and that there was a little bit of insight there. And I'll hand over to Sarah Jane.
Thank you, Anton. Good morning, everyone. I wanted to use this little section just to talk a bit about some of the really amazing soft skills that fundraisers have. And I think that, quite often we are carrying around this very sophisticated set of abilities that we don't really realise that we have. And I think they're very much of the moment. They're very much the kind of skills that employers are really looking for. And I think that they're only going to increase in value in the job market. So whether you're looking for a job at the moment or not, whether you're wanting to leave the sector or not, it's really worth thinking about what your individual soft skills and strengths are. And crucially, really valuing them as much as you would your academic and your technical abilities, because they're very much part of who you are and what you have to offer in the workplace. When I before I started as a major gift fundraiser, I remember asking a director of fundraising, what are the 2 skills that I really need to be successful in philanthropy? And she said to me, and I really hope she's not watching this morning because she gave me some terrible advice, which I subsequently completely disregarded. She said, you need to be really good at sucking up to people, and you need to have an ability to retain huge amounts of information. So you need to know as much about your cause as your chief executive. And I remember at the time thinking that cannot possibly be true, because surely being a major gift fundraiser is all about the ability to read and understand and interpret people's emotions, and to use that knowledge with integrity to take somebody down a path, to persuade somebody to give. There's no hard skill there. You don't need a degree or diploma to do any of that. And what I found as I moved into my career was pretty much all of the soft skills that I needed, I already innately had. I was already doing them quite naturally, partly because of my character, but also because of the experiences I'd had in my life up to that point. I'd been an actor, I trained to be an actor, so I understood about character motivation, how to tell a story. I understood about the nature of status, and I also understood how to listen with intent. I was already doing all of those things. LinkedIn Learning did a very interesting piece of research. I think they do it annually, but they do this piece of research around what are the top 5 soft skills that employers are looking for. And in 2020, those top 5 things are creativity, collaboration, adaptability, persuasiveness, and emotional intelligence. And it's not difficult to link all of those things up to what we do as fundraisers every single day. I think fundraisers are very much, ahead of the game. When you're a fundraiser, the central tenet of your job is to persuade. Every time you write a case of support, you are demonstrating the power of the why. every time you meet a donor, you are inviting them to come on a journey with you. It's very interesting that emotional intelligence has not time management off that top 5 spot. And I would hazard a guess to say in the not too distant future, emotional intelligence will maybe be the number 1 thing that employers are looking for, because when you think about this alongside the really relentless rise of artificial intelligence, actually what we all need to be doing at the moment is developing those skills and abilities that even a really smart machine will find difficult to replicate. And that is really about understanding, motivating and interacting with other people. And you know, I think the kind of snobbery about emotional intelligence is becoming a thing of the past. You know, it is just as important as the intellect, and in fact the intellect in the workplace on its own is not going to cut it if you don't have the power to relate. So what are the things that you can actually practically do at the moment in this very weird and unusual time that we're in? I think the number 1 thing is to know yourself really well, know your strengths. And your strengths are not the same as your skills, I don't think. Your skills are the tangible things that you can improve and get better at. Your strengths are the things that come easily and naturally to you. You know, there's things that feel like breathing in and out. You know, maybe they're the bits of your job that make you think, I can't believe I get paid to do this. You know, think about what those things are, because I think as a society, we're really obsessed with weakness. You know, we're obsessed with this idea of how can we get you better at this thing that you're not very good at. You know, you get it all the way through school, you get it in appraisals, and obviously, you know, you get asked it in interviews. But actually, the sweet spot of your career happens when you align your personality with your purpose. Something happens when those 2 things come together. And that doesn't mean to say that things fall into your lap, but that thing that you're doing feels easy. It doesn't feel like you're pushing water uphill. So think about what that thing is that you naturally excel at in your job, and be able to talk about it really compellingly in a very specific way. How have you been able to make that strength work in your job? It may be that you're a young fundraiser and you have a natural gift for relating to people from all walks of life. You know, you can talk to anybody, you can make everybody feel at ease, people trust you, you're meeting people on a level, really important in philanthropy in particular. That's an amazing skill to have. Lots and lots of people can't do that, and it can really open doors for you. So really understand that, value it, and make it work for you. The other thing is about adaptability. I really hate the word pivot. It just reminds me of being screamed at on a netball court when I was at school, because PE definitely was not my strength. But the principle behind it is really important. And I'm not an oracle. I don't know what's going to happen. Of course not. But I would imagine there's going to be probably a number of mergers happen in the charity sector as charities have to come together to be more viable. So we're going to have to start to be more adaptable and to be able to work with different new people in different ways. Possibly there might need to be more flexibility within the different disciplines within fundraising, as less people maybe being asked to do a bit more. And I think the time to practice that is now. And I think it's really important to not feel confined within maybe an ill-fitting job description. If you are an individual giving manager and you have a gift for language, and you have the time, I know that's the $1 million question at the moment, but if you have that gift and that ability, you know, why not offer yourself up to your Trust and Foundations team and offer to perhaps write a small section of a grant for them, or help them research small trusts. They're probably going to be the department that's most under the cosh at the moment. They're also possibly the department that is least susceptible to redundancy. So it's a good idea to show your adaptability in that area. If you're somebody who's buzzing with creative ideas and your organisation is about to run a campaign, pitch those ideas to your comms team. You know, you are the person that's going to know the words, the language, the images, the stories that are going to appeal to your donors. So make sure that you speak up. And then finally, I think this idea of emotional intelligence and how you develop that. I can pretty much guarantee if you're a fundraiser, you're probably going to be a lot more emotionally intelligent than lots of people. You're probably going to be a much better listener. And I think it's true to say that some people are naturally more emotionally intelligent than others, but everybody can get better at that. And I think the starting point for that is all about listening. Listening is the biggest act of generosity that you can show somebody, I think. And we're doing this all the time as fundraisers, that you're listening to your donors, but also listening to each other. And actually, Zoom calls, I know we all love them, but they're a really good way of practicing this, you know, because we're all trying not to talk over each other. Really be in the moment and really listen to somebody and observe them. That's a really good exercise to do. And listening's a lot harder than we think, because I think we're naturally wired to want to get all our lines out. So I think really what I would say as a kind of final thought is, just because something feels easy to you, you have this strength, don't be suspicious of that. Trust it and run with it and do more of it. Because as fundraisers, we are, I think, ahead of the game in terms of the soft skills that we have to play with. So really value your strengths in the same way as you would your very definitive academic technical abilities, because I think in a difficult job market, they are going to be your X factor if you know how to play them. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Julie and Anton and Sarah Jane. We're now going to move over to the Q&A part of today's session. So get your questions up on the Q&A parts of Zoom. Don't put them in chat because we'll miss them. And I'm going to hand over to Julie, who's going to run the session.
Thanks, Juliet. Great session, guys. I took so many notes down, so thank you so much for your insights. So we've had a couple of questions come in straight away. So this one, first one, Anton, straight off the bat for you. Okay, so how do you advise answering questions about being made redundant? Any advice on that?
Sure, yeah, I certainly do. I think the first thing to remember is that an awful lot of people are going to be unfortunately in this position currently. It hasn't just happened to you. By way of answering the question, firstly, the post has been made redundant, not you personally, but the position was made redundant. And to talk really openly about that, that you of course didn't necessarily see that coming, but you are viewing it as an opportunity now to progress your career and perhaps to diversify accordingly.
Fab, thank you so much. Okay, next question that we've got again is about particular. So somebody, Diana here is asking, I wanted to ask about taking a step up in my job search. So this really could be open to all of you. In a 12-month contract now, and I have a lot of experience to offer. What are the key things to stress in my job search when it comes to going up to the next level? For me, that's manager to senior manager. So if anyone wants to chip in on that, feel free.
I think if you're doing that kind of step up, that's really about strategy and your ability to see the big picture. So I think if you're going for an interview for that level of job, I think it's about having a really broad understanding of the strategic path that organisation is going on. So that's obviously doing things like really looking through the annual reports, looking at what's in the news, having that sort of broad picture.
I think the bit I would, oh, sorry, Anton.
Please, Julie.
I think the bit I would build on from Sarah Jane is, I think for me, the more senior you get in an organisation, it's about thinking broader than your remit. So in those kind of interview questions, potentially think about examples where you went above and beyond and took the initiative to help something that's outside of your core job and your core remit, because that shows, to Sarah Jane's point, you're thinking about it from an organisational point of view rather than this is my job, this is what I do. It shows that you're connecting the dots and wanting to help, which is absolutely crucial at a senior leadership position.
Anton, was this something you wanted to add as well?
It would basically be replicating what Julie said, but it sounds as though this particular person in the 12-month contract perhaps has that golden opportunity, as Julie has just touched on, to of course develop and specialise within their remit, but to really take advantage in an appropriate way of working with other departments, gaining exposure. So you really going to get sort of under your belt exposure to the other departments and the other teams that therefore all are going to contribute. And so take advantage of that.
Fabulous, thank you. So Anton, I suppose this question is more directed to you, or you would probably know more about it. Somebody's asked, like, are there even jobs out there right now? What's the percentage drop of availability? Are we seeing that the job market is shrinking because of the environment that we're in?
Sure, it's a good question, and yes, it is potentially going to shrink up to the 18, 19, 20% mark over a period of time. So yes, of course, it's going to be one of the most challenging times that the sector has ever seen. What I would say off the back of that is to really think about your transferable skills and to really think about how you might be able to add value perhaps in a different department. If you're a corporate fundraiser, for example, you will probably be very used to and comfortable with writing bids and presentations and proposals. How could that perhaps shift into a trust fundraising role? Not necessarily where you saw your career going, but for the foreseeable, just be as adaptable as possible. And I think an awful lot can be said for the digital space as well. So if you've had exposure to the digital arena, that would be an area to explore, perhaps upskill with.
Okay, great. And what sort of jobs are you seeing out there, Anton? Is there particular roles that you're seeing more prevalent at the moment than others? Yeah,
the trust area is on the up, as is digital, which is why I flagged them. An awful lot more, and this answers the previous question as well, an awful lot more interim opportunities. So if you can be flexible, if you are immediately available, you think, oh, that's not necessarily something that I would have automatically or considered before, the more flexible with your approach. There are increasingly going to be interim projects and interim support needed for the foreseeable, so if that's something you can consider as well.
I think the bit I just like to chip in is obviously thinking about resilience from a job search, because you know it's tough looking for jobs, and particularly in a really, really difficult marketplace. And so just recognizing at times that it might impact your well-being and your kind of thinking traps. And so again, maybe just reflecting on some of the things that I talked about, you know, maybe not telling yourself those stories if you're getting through to interviews, just, you know, taking the feedback with a pinch of salt, and just kind of making sure that you're keeping motivated and going. Because, you know, it's tough out there, and we just need to recognize that resilience in this space is something, you know, you need to be really mindful of to get yourself to that best place when you are interviewing, so you really are shining.
That's great advice. Thank you, Julie. One question that I've personally got, so I'm going to jump in here if that's okay. Julie, the graph that you showed right at the beginning, it was really enlightening, I have to say. The point at where we got to the peak, Stephen, I don't know if you can get the slide back on the screen, that'd be really helpful. But the point right at the peak where there seems to be like a real sort of clash of where, you know, you could really tip really, really quickly. Have you got any tips around how you personally recognise whether you're going from stretch to strain? Is there any key things that you've noticed in either yourself or, you know, some of your employees around you that you can see that switch in them, even if they can't see it themselves?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's a combination of things. I think, you know, just personally, I have definitely, there was, you know, a couple of times last year I verbalised and I literally went, I'm just at that point. I'm just literally at the peak, and one more thing might push me over. And I think, you know, again, I take a great responsibility to talking about mental health in this leadership space to kind of break down those stigmas. And so I think it comes down to my final tip is I've really spent some time understanding what my warning signs, what my sense of feeling are. And I think personally for me, it's that sort of sense of overwhelm and just like, oh my God, it's becoming too much. I don't know where to prioritize and where to kind of go. I think how you're identifying and spotting it in others, I guess I'm going to sort of pull up on one of Sarah Jane's points. It's that emotional intelligence and sort of helping to spot. We do have these innate skills. And so how is body language? How is language giving things away? You know, there are people that I work with will use things like, I'm terrified of this. And you're like, terrified actually, is that true? Because that's such a powerful word that you're feeling about this situation. So I think it's about listening for those verbal tells that are really saying, I think this person's at breaking point, but you're reading really, really powerful language that's actually telling me about how you're feeling inside, and if you can't recognize it, but also then the actual physical signs. And, you know, it's difficult in a digital world. You know, for me, it'd be like, you're spending too much time in the office. What are you doing? You know, I can see the stress. I can see you're walking around. So, you know, I think it's going to be really looking out for your colleagues and see how they're interacting on Zoom and see what's happening there. But again, that list of indicators that I kind of put up, you might be able to see. So things like people being detached and switching off when somebody's normally really engaged, like actually what's going on there. So I think it's about really knowing yourself and knowing what those signals are and having kind of a real honest reflection, but then also really just pulling out your best listening, emotional skills to kind of support your colleagues who you think might be at that strain point.
That's great. That's really fab. Sarah Jane, is there anything you want to add in the emotional intelligence part?
Yeah, I mean, I think stress, I mean, it's such an individual thing, you know, and it can be, I mean, I know for myself, what tends to happen is I lose my focus. So it's a combination of mental and physical things that just become very overpowering and overwhelm you. So I mean, I agree this idea of listening and observing is really important. And I think when somebody who's very confident and extrovert starts going really quiet in the workplace, that's when you need to start being quite concerned about them. It's when people start doing the opposite of what they normally do, I think is something that you need to be watching out for. But it's just about tuning your antennae into not necessarily always what people are saying, but what they're doing.
Fab. Thank you so much. Okay, Stephen, you can stop sharing the screen now. Thanks. So there's another question that's just come in. Someone's specifically asking about how do you deal with the income question if your numbers aren't where you want them to be, e.g. Being made redundant from a role just as you begin to hit your stride with your work environment?
Yeah, that's a tough question.
Sorry, I thought I got chucked out of Zoom then, bear with me. Sorry, Sarah Jane, were you going to?
Well, I was sort of mulling that. So somebody is hitting their stride with their income targets and then they lose their job. How do you deal with that? Is that the question?
Yeah. I'll reread the question. It says, how do you deal with the income question if your numbers aren't where you want them to be, e.g. made redundant from a role just as you're beginning to hit your stride? So when I suppose maybe they mean when you're going into another job, how do you explain that?
I think I would say something along the lines of all the indicators were that was going to hit target. You know, you're truthful, like I was going to hit target. Unfortunately, because of X, Y, Z, it means it didn't happen. So, you know, or it was on target just as I'm about to leave back, and everything I hear afterwards is that actually it's gone on from strength to strength, and that groundwork I put in has enabled my colleagues to then take it to the next level. So I think it's being honest that it was on track and that was great and you were doing a good job, but there were just circumstances that meant you couldn't see it through.
Yeah, perhaps just to follow up briefly, the importance with that income question, if you haven't hit what you were looking for, just to perhaps round that answer off with talking about kind of the stakeholders that you need to perhaps report into around that income generation, and that's a really nice point to as much as possible include with your answers to talk about peers and stakeholders, and that you, of course, throughout that period of time when you recognised that the numbers weren't where you had projected that they would be, that you of course kept your your director or your boss or whoever informed, kept communicating with them, and kept that open conversation.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so there's another question then more around Sarah Jane. We were literally having a very similar discussion about this before we came live, but it was really around if you are a younger fundraiser and you're being interviewed with a more senior fundraiser, how do you handle that? I mean, we were literally, like I said, discussing this. If you can answer some of that, it would be fab.
Yeah, it's really, I think the status issue is really interesting, and I think particularly when you work in philanthropy, it's really key because, you know, quite often you are in a room with somebody who is ostensibly a lot more powerful than you are. And it's really, really important that you meet that person absolutely on a level in a donor situation, because otherwise you can't build that relationship from any position of trust and respect. And you know, similarly, when you're in an interview situation with someone who's more senior than you are walking a line. I mean, you have to be. I do think you have to be careful in interviews that you don't come across as somebody who knows more than they do. But you also have to come across as somebody who is prepared to be on that level. The thing that's really interesting about power and status is, in many ways, it is a bit of an illusion, because actually, when sometimes people look like they're kind of emanating this power and status, and they can feel very intimidating, but actually what's really happening is things are being projected onto them. So they may look like they're powerful, but actually it's other people's perception of them. And I think when you kind of get your head around that, people become a lot less intimidated. And it's also about confidence and self-esteem. So when you go into an interview, you know, you go in with, if you're properly prepared, you go in with an understanding that you know your stuff, you have every right to be in the room, you've gone through a process to get there, you have a whole set of experiences to offer, and you sell yourself in the best possible way. But I think, you know, sometimes, you know, sometimes people are intimidating. You know, sometimes I can go into a meeting with a donor and somebody is really intimidating, and you do sometimes have to style things out a bit. You know, if you don't feel it, fake it. You know, and that will get you through. But I think it's about preparation. It's about understanding that status is a bit of an illusion. Keeping those two things in your head are really useful.
I think the bit where I would build in terms of gravitas is about, if you think about the people who have gravitas, they're calm, they're considered, they speak slowly and lowly. And so you think about how you get yourself in that space before you go into an interview or before you go into any high profile meeting, and how do you just get yourself the best you can be, and kind of your breathing. You know, if you think about when you're nervous, you're shallow, you're speaking really quickly, and it's about being calm and being centered and kind of getting rid of all that noise. I guess the other couple of tips I have, and I don't want to claim any, ownership of this. There's somebody called Caroline Goyder. She's absolutely amazing. She's written a few books. One is called The Gravitas Method, that really talks through some of those tips and tricks, and she covers interviews, meetings, televisions, like all those kind of big things, and sort of breaks it down how you to do gravitas. And I actually have her book literally right next to me. She's done something called Find Your Voice, because obviously when you're talking, your voice is the instrument and the tool. And there's some really great things in here about how you can project, because I think with that gravitas, it literally, your voice is the instrument of how you're communicating it alongside your words and your body language. So Caroline Goyder is awesome, and if you're interested, she's got books, she's got audio clips and everything like that. Follow her on Instagram, she'll give you some really amazing things if this is something you're interested in looking at more.
I think that's, sorry, just to chip in, I think that's really, I've not heard of that book, but that's really interesting. And that point of slowing your speech down is a brilliant tip, because obviously when we're nervous, we tend to speak quickly. And high status people tend to, they don't speak very quickly and they don't move very quickly because they don't have to. So when you're a lower status person, you feel you are, you get in there really quickly, because you don't have that kind of sense of trust that a high status person has. So really, really good tip. Looks like an interesting book.
Yeah, and I have to say, I am somebody who naturally speaks really quickly. I think I've got so many thoughts that my mouth struggles to keep up. So this is something I've personally done a lot of work on, and I think it really helps. So I guess passing on my experiences to hopefully other people.
Okay, thanks. That was great, Julie. I think we've got time to squeeze in one really, really quick question. So someone said here, someone who's in a different position to most, having secured a promotion during lockdown, now effectively having two roles, I do at times feel the strain of having multiple priorities and competing demands. As a happy helper, I struggle to say no to taking on more projects. Do you have any tips on how to manage this conversation when I'm feeling strained?
I would definitely say, and it's not an easy thing to do, to say no to someone, but more so by way of kind of really communicating to people and managing their expectations. And it might be that they come to you with a project and say, oh, can you help me with this? I need it by Friday. I can help you with that. Unfortunately, the capacity that I have this week isn't going to allow for that. So you're not saying no necessarily if you don't feel comfortable saying no, but you're just explaining to them, this is the capacity that I have at the moment. I'm not going to be able to get that to you by Friday. Would 2 weeks on Friday work, or whatever? So therefore, just managing their expectations a little bit, and then they'll, that's your way of very diplomatically still being helpful, but also highlighting that you're under pressure as well.
Fab. Okay, I think we've got time for one more. I know I said that was the last one, but I really do have time for one more. Okay, so one's come. Well, I've got two really quick questions. Okay, so what's your number one suggestion for someone who's ambitious and wants to progress in their career? What if they love their organisation but see there's not much space to grow there? What would you suggest they do?
Go on, Sarah Jane.
No, you go first.
Look, it's a tough choice to make, but if you really, really want the next step, then I think there is something about looking for opportunities elsewhere. You can always come back to the organisation, and I think it's about leaving on high and leaving with good relations. And if you start to get frustrated and bashing your head against the door, then just find somewhere which is going to make you thrive. And sometimes you need to sort of take a diagonal step to kind of come back where you want to be. So as much as you love that organisation, you feel passionate, you're probably going to feel passionate about somewhere else, and you can take that and then build it onto your next step. So I guess being open in that mindset of, you might think your next step is at that organisation, but actually your dream job might be somewhere else. Yeah,
that's great. And this is definitely the final question, I promise. How do you handle your job search if you're an old roles are traditionally given to younger fundraisers?
Sorry, you cut out there a bit. Can you say?
Oh, sorry. How do you handle a job search if you're an older fundraiser and the roles are traditionally given to younger people?
Good question. If you're an older fundraiser, I think you have a whole array of life experiences and skills that you can draw on that a young person may not necessarily have. You have a much more holistic view. I mean, I came into fundraising quite late, really. I think I was in my mid-30s, and I've done a number of other things up to that point that as I said in my little section, that fed into that. So you have, as an older person, you possibly have more gravitas. Obviously you're still patronised when you're in your late 40s. It still happens. It doesn't end, but you get it less. And that does come with age. So it's about thinking about all of those positive things about being an older job seeker. And I'm not sure what part of. I'd be interested to see which parts of fundraising naturally go to younger people. Is it a more junior role? Is it somebody who's come into the career much later on and is having to start at the bottom?
I'm not sure, they didn't elaborate on that, Sarah Jane, but thank you for your answers. And I think we're going to have to leave it there today because we are up on our time. It's 11 o'clock. So thank you so much. Julie, I'm going to hand over to you.
Yes, thank you. I'll talk really, really quickly. That was just amazing. Thank you so much, guys. And yeah, I'm definitely going to go out and buy that book on the gravitas method. So thank you. We'll be back again on the first Thursday in September. We're going to have Jo Swinho, who's Director of Income Generation, Fundraising and Engagement for the NSPCC, who's going to be presenting on how to construct a strategy on one side of A4. How about that? That sounds awesome. Do come along. Session will be free as today, but you will be invited to make a £5 donation to the NSPCC for attending. You can get your tickets now, so go for it before they sell out. So finally, thank you so much for joining. We hope to see you again very, very soon. Stay safe. Bye.